I made the decision to visit my husband's mistress in the hospital. I needed to see her face to face, to look directly into her eyes and ask her one simple question. Was he worth it? But when I pushed open that hospital room door, what I saw didn't just break my heart. It shattered every illusion I'd been clinging to for 32 years. My purse hit the floor before I could stop it. The sound echoed through that sterile room like the death rattle of my marriage, and I watched my life scatter across the linoleum in pieces I'd never be able to put back together. I want to pause here for just a moment. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. If you're reading this, please take a second to let me know in the comments which city you're following this story from. I need to know how far this truth has traveled, because what I'm about to share with you needs to be heard by every woman who's ever wondered if she was enough. The hospital corridors stretched endlessly before me that Thursday afternoon. Each step echoed against the polished tile like a countdown to my own undoing. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that cold, institutional glow that makes everything look both too sharp and completely unreal. I gripped my leather handbag against my ribs like it could somehow hold my heart in place. My knuckles bone white around the strap. My wedding ring, 32 years on my finger, cut into my skin with every step. Room 407. I had memorized that number like a diagnosis I couldn't accept. Like a prescription for pain I'd written myself. It had taken me 3 weeks to work up the courage to come here. 3 weeks of sleepless nights staring at the ceiling while Drury snored beside me. 3 weeks of pushing food around my plate while he told me about his day. Every word another lie I pretended to believe. 3 weeks of watching the man I'd built my entire life around slip through my fingers one excuse at a time. But I was done being the fool who smiled and nodded. I was done pretending I didn't see the lipstick shade on his collar that I'd never worn. Done pretending his phone wasn't suddenly password protected after 28 years of leaving it on the counter. Done pretending. The scent of antiseptic and illness burned my nostrils as I stood outside her door. Christine Morrison, 28 years old. That's all I knew about the woman who had been sharing my husband's bed. His time, his heart. 28. I was already 30 when I walked down the aisle toward Drury, already dreaming of the forever we were going to build together. She hadn't even been born yet. When I was changing our daughter's diapers and staying up all night with colic, Christine was still just a possibility somewhere in the universe. When I was helping Drury study for his business exams and working double shifts to keep us afloat, she was learning to walk. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. Through the small rectangular window, I could see the edge of a hospital bed. White sheets tucked tight and sterile. Somewhere beyond that glass was the answer to the question that had been eating me alive. What does she have that I don't? I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in the mirror at home, usually at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. I would walk in with my head high, my shoulders back, every inch the dignified woman I'd spent 55 years becoming. I would look at her, really look at her, and I would ask my question calmly, clearly. Was he worth destroying a family for? Was he worth becoming the other woman? Did you even ask if he was married, or did you simply not care? I steadied my breathing the way I'd learned during 30 years as a registered nurse. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 4. You've seen worse than this, Janet. You've held the hands of dying patients and felt their last heartbeat fade under your fingers. You've delivered news that destroyed families in seconds. You've stood in rooms thick with grief and kept your voice steady, your hands sure. You can handle looking at one home-wrecking girl in a hospital bed, but nothing in 30 years of nursing could have prepared me for what I saw when I pushed open that door. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, catching dust particles in the air and casting everything in a soft golden glow. Like something out of a romance movie. Like something beautiful and sacred was happening in that room instead of the destruction of everything I'd ever believed in. And there, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed with his back to me, was my husband. My Drury, The man who had kissed me goodbye that morning and told me he had back-to-back meetings all day and wouldn't be home until late. The man who had been working late every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months. The man who had promised to love, honor, and cherish me until death do us part. He was holding a plastic spoon, carefully feeding soup to the woman lying in the bed. But it wasn't just the feeding that stopped my heart mid-beat. It was the tenderness in every movement. The way he dabbed at the corner of her mouth with a napkin, so gentle, so careful. The soft murmur of his voice, as he said something I couldn't hear, something that made her smile weakly up at him. The way he set down the spoon and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his touch lingering like she was something precious. I recognized that tenderness. I'd seen it before. It was the same gentleness he'd shown me when I had the flu during our 2nd year of marriage and couldn't keep anything down for 3 days. The same careful attention he'd given me after my gallbladder surgery 5 years ago. When I was weak and hurting and needed him. This was the Drury I'd fallen in love with. The caretaker, the protector. He was just giving it to someone else now. And there, catching the light as he lifted the spoon back to her lips, was the watch. The anniversary watch. The Citizen Eco Drive. I'd saved for 3 months to buy him last year, working extra weekend shifts at the hospital and skipping lunches to squirrel away enough money. I'd wanted to see his face light up when he opened it. I'd wanted him to know that, after 31 years, I was still thinking of ways to make him smile. The inscription on the back read, "Forever yours, Janet." He was wearing it while he fed another woman. While he cared for her. While he played house with someone young enough to be our daughter. Christine wasn't what I'd expected. She wasn't some glamorous seductress dripping in makeup and designer clothes. She wasn't a calculated homewrecker with cold eyes and a hard smile. She looked young, so heartbreakingly young, with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and her face bare and pale against the white pillows. She looked sick and small and vulnerable. She looked like someone's daughter, like someone I might have cared for on my own ward, someone I would have checked on during night rounds and made sure had an extra blanket. And the way Drury was looking at her, God help me. He was looking at her the way he used to look at me, before the years piled up and the routine set in, and I became just another fixture in his life, as familiar and unremarkable as the furniture. My purse slipped from my fingers. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot in the silence. My wallet, my keys, my reading glasses, my hand sanitizer, everything scattering across the floor in a cascade of noise that announced my presence. My intrusion, my complete and utter devastation. Drury's head snapped toward the door. The spoon froze halfway to Christine's mouth, soup dripping back into the bowl. His eyes met mine across that small room, and I watched our entire marriage die in the space between one breath and the next. I watched his face cycle through shock, then horror, then something worse. Guilt mixed with defiance, like a teenager caught but already preparing his excuses. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Janet, But I was already backing away, my hands scrabbling blindly for the doorframe behind me. I couldn't breathe. The antiseptic smell that had been my second home for 3 decades was suddenly suffocating. The fluorescent lights were too bright, burning my eyes. The sound of my own heartbeat was deafening, a drum of panic and betrayal pounding in my ears so loudly I couldn't think. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to be the one in control. I came here to confront her, to demand answers, to look into the face of the woman who'd stolen my husband, and understand what I was up against. I wasn't supposed to find him here. Wasn't supposed to see him caring for her with the same hands that had once promised they would only hold me. Wasn't supposed to witness him giving her the love he'd stopped giving me. I turned and ran. My nursing shoes squeaked against the linoleum as I fled down that endless corridor, past the nurse's station where I knew 2 of the women working that shift, past visitors clutching flowers and balloons and get-well cards, Past all the normal people living their normal lives while mine exploded behind me in room 407. I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. If I stopped moving, I would collapse right there in the hallway. And I couldn't let that happen. Not here. Not where people knew me. Not where I'd built a reputation over 30 years as the nurse who never fell apart. Who stayed calm in every crisis. Who held it together when everyone else was breaking down. I didn't stop running until I reached my car in the parking garage, tucked away on the 3rd level where no one could see me. Only then did I allow myself to fall apart, and I gripped the steering wheel with both hands and let the sobs tear through my chest like they were trying to break out through my ribs. Great, heaving gasps that made my whole body shake. 32 years. 32 years of cooking his favorite meals every Sunday. Of ironing his shirts every Monday morning, even though I worked 12-hour shifts and came home exhausted. Of supporting every dream, every job change, every risk he wanted to take. Of raising his children, and building his home and being his partner, his lover, his friend, his everything. 32 years. And he was feeding soup to a girl who was 28 years old. A girl who hadn't even existed for 4 years of our marriage. But as I sat there in that dim parking garage, my breath fogging the windshield and my mascara running in black rivers down my face, something shifted inside me. The tears stopped. The shaking stopped. And for the first time in months, my mind became absolutely, perfectly clear. I went to that hospital to look my husband's mistress in the eye and get my answers. But what I saw in that room changed everything. Because I realized this wasn't just about an affair. This wasn't just about sex or excitement or a midlife crisis. This was about a man who could sit beside another woman's hospital bed and tend to her with the same hands that had once promised to cherish only me. This was about betrayal so deep, so complete, so carefully constructed that it had its own routine, its own rhythm, its own reality. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice he'd been making over and over again, for God knows how long. And that level of betrayal required something more than tears. It required something more than confrontation. It required strategy. It required precision. It required me to stop thinking like a heartbroken wife and start thinking like the woman I'd been before Drury, before marriage, before I'd made him the center of my entire universe. Lucky for me, I just learned exactly what I was up against. I knew where he went on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I knew her name, her age, her room number. I knew he wore my gift while he betrayed me. And most importantly, I knew he had no idea I knew any of it. But let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand what he destroyed before you can understand what I'm about to take back. I met Drury Bennett on a Tuesday night in 1993. I was 23, fresh out of nursing school and working the evening shift at Mercy General. He came into the ER with his younger brother, who'd broken his arm playing basketball, and while I was setting the cast, Drury kept making jokes to keep his brother calm. Bad jokes. Terrible jokes. The kind that made me roll my eyes, but also smile despite myself. Before he left, he asked for my number. Wrote it down on the back of his brother's discharge papers with a pen he borrowed from my pocket. Called me the next day. Took me to dinner that Friday at a place he couldn't really afford because he wanted to impress me. We split a dessert because neither of us had money to waste. And he told me about his dreams of starting his own consulting firm someday. His eyes lit up when he talked about the future. Our future, he said, even on that first date, like it was already decided, like we were already inevitable. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at my mother's church. I wore a dress I'd found on sale. He wore a suit borrowed from his father. We honeymooned for 3 days at a bed and breakfast 2 hours away because that's all we could afford. And it was perfect. He was perfect. We were perfect. For years we built everything together. And when Drury wanted to go back to school for his MBA, I worked double shifts to keep us afloat. I'd come home at 2 in the morning, my feet aching and my back screaming, and find him asleep at the kitchen table with his textbooks open and cold coffee in his mug. I'd cover him with a blanket and kiss his forehead and feel grateful that I got to be the one supporting his dreams. That's what love was supposed to look like, wasn't it? Sacrifice, partnership, taking turns holding each other up. When he finally launched his consulting firm in 2001, I was there. I helped him pick out office furniture from thrift stores. I designed his first business cards on our home computer. I answered phones during my days off and pretended to be his assistant so he'd sound more established. When clients called, I'd say, "Mr. Bennett is with another client right now, but I'll have him return your call." Then I'd hang up and tell Drury, while he grinned at me like I'd just handed him the world. We had 2 children, Marcus and Shayla. I took maternity leave twice and went back to work early both times because we needed my insurance, my steady paycheck, my reliability. Drury's business was growing but unpredictable. Some months were feast, others were famine. So I was the constant, the caregiver at home and at work. The one who made sure everyone else was okay, even when I was running on 4 hours of sleep and forgetting to eat lunch. I told myself that's what being a wife meant. What being a mother meant. What being a good woman meant. You show up. You sacrifice. You love harder when things get difficult. You don't complain because complaining makes you sound ungrateful for the blessings you have. But somewhere along the way, things changed. So gradually, I didn't even notice at first. It started with missed dinners. Drury would text at 5:30 saying he had to meet a client, close a deal, handle an emergency. I'd plate his food and cover it with foil and put it in the microwave for when he got home. Except he'd come home later and later, and the food would sit there untouched until I threw it away the next morning. Then came the phone. The phone that used to sit on the counter while he showered. The phone I'd answer when it rang during dinner because we didn't have secrets. Suddenly it had a password. Suddenly he took it everywhere, even to the bathroom. Suddenly he'd step outside to take calls, his voice low and careful, and when he came back in, he'd say it was work. Always work. And I believed him because what else was I supposed to do? Call my husband a liar? Accuse him of something I had no proof of? That's not what good wives do. The late nights multiplied. Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, eventually Saturdays too. He'd kiss me on the forehead and say he had to go into the office, had to meet with a difficult client, had to put out a fire. And I'd nod and tell him I understood, because I did understand. I understood what it meant to build something from nothing. I'd been there. I'd helped him do it. What I didn't understand was that I was building his life while he was building a life without me. The red flags were there. I just kept painting them green in my mind. When I found a receipt for an expensive restaurant we'd never been to, I told myself it was a business dinner. When his credit card bill showed charges from a jewelry store and I never received a gift, I told myself he was probably buying something for his mother or our daughter. And when he started working out obsessively and buying new clothes, younger clothes, I told myself he was just taking better care of himself. Good for him. That's healthy. That's normal for a man in his 50s who wants to feel young again. I made excuses for everything because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. The alternative meant my marriage was dying. Meant I was losing him. Meant that everything I'd sacrificed and built and given up might have been for nothing. I started to feel invisible in my own home. I'd talk and he'd scroll through his phone. I'd ask about his day and get one-word answers. I'd reach for his hand and he'd already be walking away. We'd sit in the same room for hours and not speak. The silence thick and suffocating, but neither of us willing to name what was happening. And the worst part, I blamed myself. I thought if I just tried harder, if I cooked better meals, or lost weight, or wore prettier clothes, or laughed at his jokes the way I used to, maybe he'd look at me again the way he did when we were 25 and broke and building dreams on our kitchen table. But you can't compete with a ghost. and I didn't even know I was competing. Sitting in that parking garage after fleeing room 407, I finally understood something I should have seen years ago. I'd been emotionally alone long before I walked into that hospital. Long before I saw him feeding soup to another woman. The loneliness had been creeping in for months, maybe years, taking up residence in the space between us while I pretended everything was fine. I'd lost my husband long before I knew there was someone else. I just hadn't been ready to admit it. But now I was ready to see everything I'd been too afraid to look at. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Stay with me, because what I discovered next showed me this wasn't just an affair. This was an entire second life. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hospital room. The golden afternoon light. Drury's hand brushing hair from Christine's forehead. The anniversary watch catching the sun. The tenderness in his movements. The soup. The napkin. The smile. Over and over again. Like a loop I couldn't stop. Drury came home just after midnight. I heard his key in the lock. Heard him set down his briefcase in the hallway. Heard his footsteps pause outside our bedroom door. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady, the way I'd learned to do during night shifts when I needed to stay alert, but appear resting. He stood there for a full minute, waiting, listening. Then he moved on to the guest bathroom down the hall. He didn't try to explain, didn't come to bed with excuses ready. And that told me everything. He knew I'd seen him. He just didn't know what I was going to do about it. Neither did I. Not yet. But something shifted in me that night. Something clinical and cold clicked into place. After 30 years of nursing, I knew how to compartmentalize. I knew how to separate emotion from observation. I knew how to assess a situation methodically, looking for patterns, checking vitals, gathering data before making a diagnosis. And that's exactly what I needed to do now. So I stopped crying. I started watching. The first thing I did was replay every detail I could remember. Not the emotional parts, the factual ones. Drury had been sitting on the edge of Christine's bed, not in the visitor's chair. He'd been feeding her, which meant he was comfortable enough in that space to take on caretaking duties. He wasn't visiting. He was tending. There's a difference. I knew it from my own work. Family sits on beds. Family feeds patients. Visitors sit in chairs and make awkward small talk. He was acting like family. Then there was the watch. He'd been wearing it, not hidden away in guilt, but openly displayed, which meant either he was careless or he didn't think he needed to hide it anymore. Both options made my stomach turn. I started tracking the timeline. Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, he'd been at that hospital, but he'd told me that morning he had meetings until 6. I pulled up my phone and scrolled back through our text messages. For the past 6 months, every Tuesday and Thursday, Drury had claimed to be working late. Late meetings, difficult clients, office catch-up. Tuesdays and Thursdays, visiting hours. My nursing brain kicked into high gear. If Christine was in the hospital now, how long had she been there? And if she'd been there for weeks, that would explain Drury's increased absences. But if this was a short-term admission, then where had he been going on all those other Tuesdays and Thursdays before she got sick? I needed more information, and I knew exactly how to get it. I still had friends at Mercy General. Sarah Chen had been my colleague for 12 years before I'd moved to the clinic. We'd worked countless night shifts together, shared too many vending machine dinners, covered for each other when life got messy. I sent her a text Friday morning, casual and light, asked if she wanted to grab coffee on her break. She said yes immediately. We met at the cafe across from the hospital. I waited until she'd finished complaining about the new administrator and the broken equipment in the ICU. Then I said it carefully, like I was just curious, like it didn't matter much at all. Hey, do you know anything about a patient named Christine Morrison? Young woman, probably on the 4th floor. Sarah's face shifted. Recognition. then something that looked like pity. "Oh, Janet, I didn't know you knew about that." My heart stopped. "About what?" She looked uncomfortable. "Christine's been admitted 3 times in the past 4 months. Some kind of chronic condition. I think autoimmune. The nurses on that floor all know her, and they know your husband. 4 months. He'd been doing this for at least 4 months, probably longer. This wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was established, routine, expected. He's listed as her primary contact, Sarah continued quietly. Emergency contact too. Her parents are out of state, I think. So when she comes in, the hospital calls him first. The hospital calls him first. My husband is another woman's emergency contact. The words echoed in my head like a diagnosis I didn't want to hear, but couldn't deny. How long have people known? I asked. My voice sounded steady. I was proud of that. Janet, I'm sorry. I thought you knew. I thought maybe you had some kind of arrangement or... How long? She looked down at her coffee. At least a year. Maybe longer. The nurses talk. You know how it is. But everyone assumed you knew. Nobody wanted to be the one to say something if you were handling it privately. A year, minimum. While I was ironing his shirts and making his favorite meals and believing his lies about late meetings. While I was blaming myself for our distance and wondering what I'd done wrong. He'd been building this entire other relationship, this other life, with hospital staff as witnesses who thought I already knew. I thanked Sarah, hugged her, drove home in complete silence with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind racing. That night, Drury tried to talk to me, stood in the kitchen doorway while I made dinner like nothing had changed. Janet, about yesterday. Not now, Drury. We need to talk about this. I said not now. He stood there for another moment, then left. And I realized something crucial. He wanted me to confront him, wanted me to yell, to cry, to demand explanations. Because then he could control the narrative. He could give me the answers he'd prepared, feed me the story he wanted me to believe, manage the damage on his terms. But I wasn't going to give him that. Not yet. I started going through our financial records that weekend, while Drury played golf. Bank statements, credit cards, investment accounts. And there they were. The signs I should have seen months ago. Charges to pharmacies I didn't recognize. Medical supply companies. Payments to specialists. Transfers to accounts that weren't ours. He'd been paying her medical bills. Not just visiting her, supporting her. Financially, emotionally, completely. This wasn't an affair in the traditional sense. This was a parallel relationship. He was living 2 lives, and I'd been too busy taking care of everyone else to notice I was becoming a ghost in my own marriage. But I was done being invisible, done being the woman who didn't ask questions because she was afraid of the answers. I made a decision that Sunday night, while Drury snored beside me in our bed. I would not confront him. I would not cry or beg or demand anything. Instead, I would watch. I would document. I would gather every piece of evidence I could find about what he'd done and how long he'd been doing it. I would stop asking questions and start collecting answers. Because when the time came to speak, I wanted to make sure I had every single fact, every lie, every dollar, every moment. I was going to build a case so airtight that he couldn't talk his way out of it. And what I found in those bank statements. That was just the beginning. The life he'd been living without me was about to come into sharp, undeniable focus. I became an archaeologist of my own marriage. Every night after Drury fell asleep, I'd slip out of bed and go to his home office. The same office I'd helped him set up when his business took off. The same desk I'd assembled with an Allen wrench while 7 months pregnant with Marcus. Now I sat there in the dark, the glow of the computer screen illuminating years of lies. Our joint account told the first story, the one I'd always had access to, but never really examined, because I trusted him, trusted us. Monthly transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Always the same amount. $2,000 every month for 18 months. $36,000. I sat there staring at that number until it stopped looking like money and started looking like intent. $36,000 doesn't happen by accident. That's not an affair. That's not a mistake. That's a budget. That's planning. That's a man building something permanent. I dug deeper. His personal credit card, the one he'd always said was just for business expenses. Charges to Tiffany and Co. 3 different times over the past year. The amounts made my stomach drop. $1,200 in March, $2,000 in July, $3,500 in November, right before our anniversary, when he'd given me a card and a kiss on the forehead and said he was too swamped with work to plan anything special. I'd never seen any jewelry, never received anything from Tiffany's, but someone had. There were charges to restaurants I'd never been to, the kind of places you take someone when you want to impress them. Morton's Steakhouse, the Capitol Grill, a French bistro downtown that I'd mentioned wanting to try for our last anniversary, but he'd said it was too expensive. Too expensive for me, not for her. Medical bills painted an even clearer picture. Payments to specialists I'd never heard of. A rheumatologist, an immunologist, a hematology center, co-pays and prescription charges from pharmacies across town. Nowhere near our house or his office. He'd been managing her health care. Not just emotionally supporting her, but financially carrying her through a chronic illness. I found receipts tucked in his desk drawer. Small things I might have missed if I wasn't looking. A lease agreement for an apartment I didn't recognize the address of. Utility bills in his name for that same address. Internet service. Streaming subscriptions. He was paying for a whole separate household. Christine's household. My hands shook as I pulled up his phone records online. I had access. We'd always had a shared family plan, but I'd never needed to look before. Now I scrolled through months of call logs, hours of calls to one number, the same number over and over, dozens of texts daily. Not just on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Every day, multiple times a day. Morning calls before he left for work. Lunch calls. Evening calls after I'd gone to bed. He was talking to her more than he talked to me. He'd been doing it for years, right under my nose, while I slept beside him and made his coffee and asked about his day. But it was the social media that broke something in me. I'd never been one to scroll through Facebook or Instagram obsessively. I had an account but rarely used it. Now I searched for Christine Morrison and found her easily. Her profile was private, but her profile picture was public. A young woman with warm eyes and a genuine smile. She looked kind. That made it worse somehow. I created a fake profile. Something I'm not proud of, but I needed to see. Needed to know the full scope of what I was dealing with. I sent her a friend request from an account that looked like a distant acquaintance. Someone she might have met once and forgotten. She accepted within an hour. And there it was. My husband's life without me, displayed in photographs and check-ins and tagged locations. Drury at her apartment, his arm around her on the couch. Drury at a concert I didn't know he'd attended. Drury at a farmer's market, carrying bags of produce and smiling at the camera. Drury at her birthday dinner last year, a cake with candles in front of them both, his hand over hers. The caption read, "Grateful for this man who showed up for me when I needed someone most." Posted 8 months ago. 37 likes. Comments from her friends calling him sweet, calling them cute together, calling him her rock. Her friends knew about him. They'd met him. They thought he was her boyfriend, maybe more. They had no idea he had a wife at home. Or maybe they did and simply didn't care. I scrolled back further. Photos going back 2 years. Not 18 months like the bank transfer suggested. 2 full years. Pool parties, holiday gatherings, weekend trips I thought he'd spent at conferences. In every photo, he looked relaxed, happy, present, The way he used to look with me before life got complicated and comfortable and routine. He wasn't sneaking around ashamed. He was living openly with her. He'd integrated himself into her life so completely that he was in family photos, friend group shots, casual everyday moments. This wasn't a secret he was keeping. This was a life he was living, with its own rhythm and history and future. I sat back from the computer, my chest tight with something beyond pain. This was structural, mathematical. Every $2,000 transfer was deliberate. Every jewelry purchase was planned. Every dinner reservation was intentional. He'd built this, carefully, methodically. While I was at work saving lives, he was at her apartment building another one. The affair I'd imagined, the one I'd been trying to understand and forgive in my head, didn't exist. This wasn't about sex or ego or midlife crisis. This was about replacement. He'd found someone younger. Someone who needed him in ways I no longer did after 32 years of marriage. Someone who made him feel important and vital and seen. And instead of working on our marriage, instead of talking to me, instead of being honest, he'd simply built a new one alongside the old. Kept us both. Had his stable, reliable wife at home and his exciting, grateful girlfriend across town. I'd been a placeholder, a safety net. The woman who kept his house running and his life organized while he lived the life he actually wanted somewhere else. My heartbreak began to calcify into something harder, something colder, something sharp enough to cut through every excuse he might try to give me. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice he made every single day for 2 years. Every transfer, every lie. Every moment he spent with her was a moment he chose not to spend fixing what we'd built together. He'd betrayed me with intention, with planning, with a budget and a timeline and a whole second life I'd been funding without even knowing it. And that realization changed everything. Because now I wasn't just hurt, I was angry. And anger, I was learning, was so much more useful than heartbreak. Anger could be focused, directed, weaponized. And I was about to become very, very focused. But first, I needed to make sure he felt safe, comfortable, careless enough to hand me everything I'd need to take him apart piece by piece. The morning after I discovered the full scope of his double life, I got up at 6:30, like always, made coffee, scrambled eggs, set out his vitamins next to his plate. When Drury came downstairs, I smiled at him. Not a big smile. Not fake. Just a small, tired smile of a wife who'd been married for 32 years and had long stopped trying to impress. "Morning," I said, sliding his plate across the counter. He looked at me carefully, searching for anger, for tears, for anything that would tell him we were about to have the conversation he'd been avoiding. But I gave him nothing. Just normalcy, just routine. Just the Janet he'd been taking for granted for years. "Morning," he said slowly, then testing the waters. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Why?" "Just checking." I sipped my coffee and scrolled through my phone like his question didn't matter. Like I hadn't spent the entire night cataloging his betrayals. Like my world hadn't imploded the moment I walked into room 407. He ate his breakfast, kissed me on the forehead before he left. Said he'd be home by 7. I nodded and told him to have a good day. The door closed behind him, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Phase 1. Complete. He thought I was letting it go. Thought I was choosing denial over confrontation, the way I'd chosen it for months already. He thought he'd gotten away with it. Good. Let him think that. I'd learned something important in 30 years of nursing. The best way to assess a patient is to observe them when they don't know you're watching. People reveal the truth when they feel safe, when they're not performing or defending or explaining. They relax. They get sloppy. They show you exactly who they are. Drury was about to show me everything. I started documenting. Not emotionally, not frantically, methodically. I bought a small notebook and kept it hidden in my nursing bag, the one place Drury would never look. Every time he said he had a meeting, I wrote down the time, the excuse, the details he gave. Every time he came home late, I noted what he was wearing, whether he'd showered, if he smelled like cologne I didn't buy him. I took screenshots of everything: bank transfers, credit card charges, phone records. I saved them to a cloud account he didn't know existed, under an email address I created just for this. I photographed receipts before putting them back exactly where I'd found them. I became a ghost in my own home, invisible and observant and meticulous. At dinner, I asked about his day. Let him lie to me with a smile on my face. Tuesday night, he said he had a late client meeting. I nodded sympathetically. Thursday night, same story. I told him not to work too hard, that he needed to take care of himself. "You're the best, John," he said, squeezing my shoulder as he grabbed his keys. I watched him leave, wrote down the time. 2:47 p.m., noted that he'd changed his shirt before leaving, something he never did for actual work meetings. Documented that he'd put on the watch. My watch. The one that was supposed to mean forever. I was learning his patterns. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 7 to 10 p.m. Saturday afternoons when he claimed he was playing golf, but his club stayed in the garage. Sunday mornings when he said he was going to the gym, but came back without the post-workout exhaustion I'd recognize after decades of seeing him exercise. Every lie had a rhythm, every deception had a tell, and I was cataloging all of it. The hardest part wasn't the investigation. It was the performance, smiling when I wanted to scream, touching him casually when my skin crawled, sleeping next to him every night knowing where he'd been, who he'd touched, what he'd promised her. Every moment required me to suppress everything I felt and show him only what he expected to see. But I'd been doing that for months already, hadn't I? Suppressing my suspicions, swallowing my questions, pretending everything was fine because confronting the truth was too terrifying. The only difference now was that I was doing it on purpose, with intention, with a plan. My nursing training became my greatest weapon. In the ICU, I'd learned to stay calm during codes when everyone else was panicking. I'd learned to make split-second decisions while maintaining a steady hand. I'd learned to observe without emotion, to assess without judgment, to act with precision when timing mattered most. This was no different. Drury was the patient. His double life was the diagnosis, and I was gathering every piece of information I'd need before deciding on treatment. I started creating distance subtly, not in ways he'd notice, but in ways I'd feel. I stopped initiating conversations, stopped asking deep questions, stopped trying to connect. I was pleasant, present, but no longer invested. I was performing the role of wife while evacuating myself emotionally from the marriage. He didn't notice, or if he did, he seemed relieved. The less I engaged, the less guilty he had to feel. The less I asked, the less he had to lie. I was making his betrayal easier, and he was grateful for it. 2 weeks into my silent investigation, I noticed something shift. Drury was getting comfortable again, careless. He stopped hiding his phone as carefully, left it face up on the counter while he showered. His lies became lazier, less detailed. He was spending more time with Christine, coming home later, sometimes not bothering to change his shirt or wash off her perfume. He thought I was broken, thought I'd seen him at the hospital, and decided to pretend it never happened, because confronting it would mean losing him. He thought my silence meant acceptance. He had no idea my silence was a strategy. 3 weeks in, he made a mistake. Left his laptop open on the dining room table when he went to grab something from his car. I walked past, casual, like I was just heading to the kitchen, but I saw the screen. An email to Christine, open and unguarded. "Can't wait to see you Thursday. Been thinking about our trip to the coast in June. Already put in for the time off. Love you." A trip to the coast in June. Time off he'd already requested. Time off he'd probably tell me was for a business conference. I took a photo with my phone, added it to my growing file. kept walking to the kitchen like I'd seen nothing. But inside, something crystallized. He wasn't just maintaining a double life. He was planning a future with her. Trips, timelines, long-term plans that included her and excluded me entirely. And he was doing it openly now, carelessly, because my silence had convinced him he was safe. Perfect. Because the more comfortable he got, the more evidence he'd hand me. The more he relaxed, the more he'd reveal. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a trap. And Drury was walking right into it, one careless mistake at a time. But what he gave me next would be the piece I'd been waiting for. The proof that would make everything else undeniable. Drury's confidence grew with my silence. Within a month, he wasn't even trying to hide anymore. He'd answer her calls in front of me, stepping just outside the room but leaving the door cracked. His voice would soften in a way it hadn't for me in years. "Yeah, I can pick that up for you." "No, don't worry about it. I've got it covered." "Miss you too. Miss you too." Said at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday, 12 feet away from his wife of 32 years who was folding his laundry. I folded another shirt. Added the detail to my notes later that night. Date, time, exact words. The documentation was becoming a second language. His lies started contradicting each other. He told me he had a client dinner on Friday, then mentioned on Saturday morning that he'd been at the office late, working on proposals. But I'd already seen the Instagram story Christine had posted Friday night. Drury in her apartment, laughing at something off camera, a wine glass in his hand. The timestamp said 8:47 p.m. He wasn't even keeping his story straight anymore. Didn't think he needed to. I was the wife who didn't ask questions, who accepted every excuse, who made his life easier by staying blind. Then came the night I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come home early from my shift. A patient's surgery had been rescheduled. Drury's car was in the driveway. I walked in quietly, not announcing myself, just tired and ready to change out of my scrubs. His voice drifted down from his office upstairs. He was on the phone, door closed, but sound carries in old houses. "I know, baby. I know it's hard." A pause. "Look, it's complicated. We've been together for over 30 years. There's history. The kids." Another pause. Longer. "I'm not making excuses. I just need to handle this the right way. She deserves that much." My hand froze on the banister. She deserves that much. Like I was a problem to be managed, a complication to be handled carefully, an obligation he was planning to fulfill before moving on to his real life. Once Marcus finishes grad school and Shayla's settled, I promise, we'll do this right. You and me. For real. His voice dropped lower, tender. "I love you. You know that. Janet and I, we're roommates at this point. Have been for years. You're the one I want to wake up next to." I stood there in my scrubs, hand gripping the railing so hard my knuckles went white. Roommates. He'd reduced 32 years of marriage, of sacrifice, of partnership to roommates, while promising another woman that I was just a temporary obstacle, that once the timing was right, he'd choose her, officially, publicly, permanently. I walked back outside, sat in my car, breathed through the rage that threatened to make me storm upstairs and destroy the calm facade I'd been building for weeks. This was it. The confirmation that this wasn't just an affair he was enjoying. This was an exit strategy. He was planning to leave. Planning a future that erased me completely. But I'd come too far to lose control now. I waited 20 minutes, then came back inside loudly, called out that I was home. Heard him end the call quickly, his voice shifting to neutral. He came downstairs smiling, asking about my day like he hadn't just been promising my replacement that she'd have him soon. Over the next 2 weeks, Christine's presence invaded every corner of our life. Her name in his calendar, her preferences showing up in our home. He bought coffee creamer I'd never used, a brand I didn't drink. When I asked about it, he said he was trying something new. but I'd seen it in her kitchen in one of her photos. He started listening to podcasts I'd never heard him mention, the same ones she posted about. He bought throw pillows for our couch in colors I'd never chosen. Her colors, her taste, her life bleeding into mine. He was preparing our home for her, slowly, subtly, replacing me piece by piece before he'd even told me he was leaving. The emotional replacement wasn't theoretical anymore. It was happening in real time. Every song he hummed was one she'd shared. Every restaurant he suggested was one they'd been to. Every opinion he'd voiced lately sounded like something a 28-year-old would say, not a 57-year-old man who'd built a life with me. I documented all of it, but late at night, alone in the bathroom with the shower running to muffle the sound, I'd let myself feel it. The grief of watching my husband transform into a stranger. The humiliation of being replaced in my own home. The rage at his audacity to keep me comfortable while planning my disposal. Some nights I wanted to quit, to confront him, to scream until my voice gave out. But then I'd remember his voice on the phone. Handle this the right way. She deserves that much. Like I was a pet, he needed to rehome responsibly, and I'd remember why I was doing this. Not for revenge, though that would be sweet. For truth, for proof. For the moment when he could no longer lie or minimize or rewrite history. For the moment when everyone would see exactly who he'd become and what he'd done. Because this level of betrayal, this calculated, this complete, didn't deserve a private conversation behind closed doors. It deserved witnesses. It deserved exposure. It deserved consequences that matched the crime. I'd spent 32 years being the good wife, the supportive partner, the woman who handled things privately and with grace. But grace was for people who deserved it. Drury had forfeited that right the moment he decided I was disposable. So I started making plans for the day the truth would come out. Not in our kitchen, not in a therapist's office. Somewhere public, somewhere permanent. Somewhere he couldn't control the narrative or manage the fallout. Because if he was going to erase 32 years of my life, I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly how he did it. And the setting I chose? It would make it impossible for him to walk away unscathed. Our son Marcus was graduating with his master's degree in 3 weeks. The ceremony was on Saturday, followed by a family dinner Drury had insisted on hosting at the Riverside, one of the nicest restaurants in the city. Both our kids would be there. Drury's brother and his wife. My sister. Close family friends we'd known for decades. 18 people total, all gathered to celebrate our son's achievement. It was perfect. Drury had no idea what was coming. He thought we were celebrating Marcus. He thought I'd keep playing the role I'd perfected over the past 6 weeks. The quiet, accepting wife who'd seen too much but said nothing. Who'd chosen peace over confrontation. Who'd decided that keeping the family together mattered more than her own dignity. He had no idea I'd been building a case. The morning of the dinner, I woke up calm. Eerily calm. The kind of calm that comes after a decision has been made, and there's no turning back. I'd spent weeks in emotional chaos, swinging between grief and rage, between wanting to save my marriage and wanting to burn it down. But today, I felt nothing but clarity. I got dressed carefully. Not in anger, not in sadness. I chose a navy blue dress, simple and elegant. The kind of outfit that commands respect without demanding attention. I did my makeup the way I always did. Hair pulled back neatly. My wedding ring still on my finger because I wanted him to see it there when I spoke. I wanted him to remember what it was supposed to mean. Drury came up behind me while I was fastening my necklace. Kissed my shoulder. You look beautiful, Jan. I met his eyes in the mirror. Thank you. No emotion, no warmth. Just acknowledgement. He didn't notice. Or maybe he was too relieved I wasn't crying to question the flatness in my voice. In my purse, I carried everything. a folder with printed bank statements, highlighted transfers totaling over $40,000. Credit card statements with charges to Tiffany's, restaurants, Christine's apartment utilities. Phone records showing thousands of calls and texts. Screenshots of social media posts spanning 2 years. The lease agreement in his name for her apartment. And a flash drive with one audio file. The conversation I'd recorded 2 weeks ago when I'd left my phone on the counter, recording, while he stepped outside to take her call. I'll leave her after Marcus graduates. I promise. Then we can stop hiding. His voice, his words, his promise to another woman. Undeniable. We drove to the restaurant together. Drury hummed along to the radio, relaxed and happy. Proud father about to celebrate his son. Devoted husband maintaining appearances. He had no idea he was driving to his own reckoning. The private dining room at the riverside was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. String lights and fresh flowers on every table. Our family was already gathering when we arrived. Marcus in his suit, beaming. Shayla hugging her brother. Drury's brother clapping him on the back. My sister catching my eye across the room, smiling. I smiled back. Not because I was happy, because I was ready. Dinner progressed normally. Appetizers, then entrees, conversations and laughter. Drury gave a toast to Marcus, his voice full of pride and emotion. Everyone clapped. Our son stood and thanked us both. Talked about sacrifice and support and family. I watched Drury's face glow with satisfaction. The patriarch, the provider, the man who'd built this life, the man who'd been dismantling it in secret for 2 years. When Marcus sat down, I stood up. Not dramatically, not with trembling hands or a shaking voice. I stood up the way I'd stood up countless times in hospital conference rooms to deliver difficult news to families. With composure, with certainty, with the calm that comes from knowing you're about to tell a truth that will change everything. I'd like to say a few words, I said. The room quieted. Everyone turned to me, smiling, expectant. Drury looked proud. Thought I was about to give a touching speech about our son, our family, our blessings. I pulled the folder from my purse and set it on the table in front of me. The sound of paper and wood seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. I'm not going to toast, I said, my voice level and clear. I'm going to tell the truth. Drury's smile faltered, just slightly. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. But not panic. Not yet. He still thought he was in control. Thought whatever I was about to say, he could manage it. Explain it away. Smooth it over like he'd been doing for 2 years. I looked at my children first, at Marcus and Shayla, their faces confused but attentive. Then at my sister, at Drury's brother, at the friends who'd known us for decades. I wanted them all to hear this. Needed them to bear witness. For the past 6 weeks, I began, I've been documenting my husband's double life. The affair he's been having with a 28-year-old woman named Christine Morrison. The apartment he's been paying for in her name. The $40,000 he's transferred from our joint account. The trips they've planned. The future he's promised her. The room went completely still. Not the comfortable quiet of anticipation, but the suffocating silence of shock. Drury's face drained of color. Janet! I held up one hand, not in anger. In authority. The same gesture I'd used in trauma bays to silence panicking family members so I could focus on saving lives. He stopped talking. I'm not finished, I said calmly, and you will let me finish. I opened the folder, pulled out the first bank statement, set it where everyone could see, and began to speak. Not with rage, not with tears, with facts, with dates, with receipts. With the kind of precision that leaves no room for denial. Because the truth, I learned, doesn't need to be screamed to be devastating. It just needs to be told. $2,000, I said, pointing to the highlighted line on the bank statement dated 18 months ago. Transferred on the 15th of every month from our joint account, to an account in Christine Morrison's name for 18 consecutive months. That's $36,000 of marital assets used to support another woman. I set down a second statement, then a third, then a fourth, each one with the same transfer, like a heartbeat of betrayal. Steady, consistent, planned. Drury opened his mouth. That's not... I can explain. You'll have your turn, I said, still calm, after I finish. I pulled out the credit card statements next, set them in front of Marcus, who was sitting closest to me. His face had gone pale, but he looked down at the pages I'd placed before him. Tiffany and Company, $1,200 in March of last year, $2,000 in July, $3,500 in November. I looked at our daughter. Shayla. Do you remember receiving any gifts from Tiffany's? Because I don't. She shook her head slowly, her eyes filling with tears. Neither do I continued. But Christine does. I've seen the necklace in her photos, the bracelet, the earrings, all purchased with money from accounts I helped build. Drury's brother was staring at him now. Not with sympathy, with something harder, disbelief mixed with disgust. I pulled out the lease agreement. This is a rental contract for an apartment on Maple Street, signed by Drury Bennett. Monthly rent, $1,500, paid from our account for the past 14 months. I've never seen this apartment, but I've seen photos of Christine inside it. She lives there. He pays for it. My sister made a small sound, almost a gasp, almost a sob. I didn't look at her. If I looked at her, if I saw the sympathy in her eyes, I might break. And I couldn't break. Not yet. The utility bills for that address, I continued, setting down more papers. Internet service, streaming subscriptions, all in his name, all paid by him. Because he wasn't just visiting her. He was building a home with her while living in ours. Mom, Marcus started, his voice cracking. I looked at my son, at the pain on his face. I'm sorry you have to hear this. I'm sorry this is happening at your celebration. But you need to know who your father is, who he's been, not the version he shows you, the truth. I picked up my phone and connected it to the small speaker I'd brought. This is a recording from 2 weeks ago. Your father was on the phone in our driveway. I was in my car. He didn't know I was there. I pressed play. Drury's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. I'll leave her after Marcus graduates, I promise. Then we can stop hiding. I love you. Janet and I are roommates at this point. You're the one I want to wake up next to. The silence that followed was crushing. I turned off the recording and set my phone down gently. Roommates, I repeated. That's what 32 years of marriage became to him. What I became. A logistical problem to be managed until the timing was convenient for his exit. Drury stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. This is insane. You can't just... You're humiliating me in front of our family. I'm not humiliating you, Drury, I said, and my voice was still steady, still calm. You did that yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows what you did. That's not humiliation. That's accountability. He looked around the table desperately, searching for allies. But our son wouldn't meet his eyes. Our daughter was crying quietly. His brother sat back in his chair, arms crossed, face hard. My sister's hand was pressed to her mouth. No one was coming to his defense. Christine is 28 years old, I continued, young enough to be our daughter. She has a chronic illness, and when I found out about this, it was because I went to visit her in the hospital. I walked into her room expecting to confront her, and instead I found my husband, feeding her, caring for her, wearing the anniversary watch I'd given him, acting like her partner while still coming home to me every night. I paused, looked at the faces around the table. I want to be clear about something. I don't hate Christine. She's not a monster. She's a young woman who probably believed whatever story he told her. Maybe she didn't know he was married. Maybe she knew and didn't care. Either way, this isn't about her. This is about him. About his choices, his lies, his complete disregard for our family, our vows, our life together. Drury sank back into his chair, his face ashen. The fight had drained out of him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like all the air had been let out of the performance he'd been giving for 2 years. I have spent the last 6 weeks documenting everything, I said. Every lie, every dollar, every moment. Not because I wanted to destroy you, but because I knew you'd try to rewrite history. You'd minimize. You'd claim it wasn't serious, wasn't planned, wasn't real. But this, I gestured to the paper spread across the table. This is real. This is intentional. This is you building a life with someone else while keeping me as a safety net, in case it didn't work out. I gathered my papers slowly, methodically, and placed them back in the folder. Then I looked at Drury one last time. Not with hatred, not with anger, with finality. I'm filing for divorce on Monday. My lawyer already has copies of everything. You can try to contest it if you want, but we both know what the outcome will be. You can go to Christine now if you want. Your timeline just moved up. I stood, picked up my purse, looked at my children. I love you both. This isn't your fault, and it doesn't change anything about who you are or how proud I am of you. Marcus, congratulations on your graduation. You've earned every bit of this success. Then I walked out. Not running, not crying, just walking. One foot in front of the other, through the restaurant, out the door, into the cool evening air. Behind me, I heard raised voices. My sister calling my name. But I didn't stop, because I'd said everything that needed to be said. And for the first time in 6 weeks, maybe 6 years, I felt like I could breathe. The truth was out. The mask was off. And whatever came next, I would face it on my terms, not his. But what I discovered in the days that followed, it showed me that the end of a marriage could also be the beginning of something I'd forgotten I was capable of. The morning after the dinner, I woke up alone in my sister's guest room. The sun was streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all came back. The restaurant, the folder, Drury's face, the silence as I walked out. I expected to feel devastated, broken, lost. Instead, I felt light. Like I'd been carrying something impossibly heavy for years and had finally set it down. The weight of pretending, the exhaustion of denial, the constant work of making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. All of it was gone. My phone had 43 missed calls, most from Drury, several from Marcus and Shayla, a few from friends who'd heard what happened. I turned it off. Whatever they needed to say could wait. For the first time in 32 years, I was going to prioritize myself. The divorce wasn't complicated. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd seen worse, laid it out clearly. With the evidence I'd gathered, Drury had no leverage. No way to claim I was exaggerating or being vindictive. The bank statements alone told the story. Marital assets used to support another woman. A pattern of deception, financial infidelity alongside the emotional kind. He tried to negotiate, called Patricia's office asking for mediation, for a chance to talk privately, for me to be reasonable. She shut it down every time. Your wife has been more than reasonable for 32 years. She told him during one call I was present for. Now she's being fair. The settlement gave me everything I'd earned and more. The house we'd built together. Half of his retirement and business assets. Spousal support that reflected 3 decades of me putting his career before mine, working extra shifts so he could take risks, being the steady foundation while he built his empire. The judge looked at my documentation and didn't hesitate. Drury moved in with Christine 2 weeks after I filed. I heard it through Shayla, who was trying hard to maintain a relationship with both of us, despite her anger at her father. Part of me had wondered if he'd actually do it, if Christine would actually want him once his lies were public. But apparently, they were trying to make it work. Building the life he'd promised her. I felt nothing about it. Not jealousy, not vindication, nothing. He'd become irrelevant to my emotional landscape faster than I'd thought possible. Maybe because I'd spent 6 weeks detaching while still living under the same roof. Or maybe because once you see someone clearly, really see them, there's nothing left to mourn. I threw myself into work, picked up the shifts I'd been declining for years because Drury wanted me home for dinners he never showed up for. Took on the leadership role at the clinic I'd been offered, but turned down because it would mean less flexibility for his schedule. Applied for the nursing director position at the hospital and got it within 2 months. Work became my therapy. Every patient I helped, every crisis I managed, every life I touched reminded me who I was before I became Drury's wife. I was Janet, skilled, competent, respected. I'd spent 3 decades helping people through their worst moments. I'd held hands through diagnoses that shattered worlds. I'd made decisions under pressure that saved lives. I'd been someone who mattered. I'd just forgotten it somewhere between making his coffee and ironing his shirts and accepting his lies. My children struggled. Marcus was angry for months, barely speaking to his father. Shayla tried to play peacemaker until I sat her down and told her she didn't have to fix this. Your father made choices that hurt all of us, I said, but that's between him and you. You don't owe me loyalty that costs you a relationship with your dad, and you don't owe him forgiveness you're not ready to give. She cried. I held her, and gradually we all found our new normal. I sold the house a year later. Too many memories in those walls. Too many versions of myself I didn't want to be anymore. I bought a condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. Decorated it exactly how I wanted. Bold colors Drury would have called too loud. Art I chose without asking anyone's opinion. Furniture that was mine alone. I started traveling. Took the trips I'd always wanted to take but couldn't because of his schedule or his preferences or his budget. Went to Italy with my sister. Hiked the Pacific Northwest with a group of nurses from work. Learned to sail in the Caribbean. Collected experiences instead of excuses. People asked if I was dating. I laughed. Not yet. Maybe eventually. Maybe never. It didn't matter. I'd spent 32 years defining myself through someone else. Now I was learning who Janet was on her own. And I was discovering I liked her. She was stronger than I remembered. Braver. More capable of joy than I'd given her credit for. I ran into Drury once, 8 months after the divorce was finalized. At a coffee shop downtown. He was alone, looked older, tired. He saw me and hesitated, like he wasn't sure if he should approach. I made the decision for him. Walked right up, said hello. Janet, he said, you look good. I am good, I said, and I meant it. He's asked how I was doing. I told him about my promotion, my condo, the trip to Italy. He nodded, his face unreadable. Then he said, I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve what I did. I looked at him. This man I'd spent more than half my life with. This man who'd betrayed me in ways I was still discovering. And I felt nothing. No anger. No lingering hurt. Just a distant recognition of someone I used to know. You're right, I said. I didn't. But I'm grateful you showed me who you really were. It freed me to become who I'm supposed to be. I walked away before he could respond, not out of spite, just because I had somewhere to be, a life to live, a version of myself to continue discovering. That's what I took back from him in the end. Not the house, or the money, or the satisfaction of public exposure, though those mattered. What I reclaimed was my dignity, my worth, my understanding that I was never the problem. That being left doesn't mean being lesser. That ending doesn't mean failure when you're walking away from something that was destroying you quietly. I took back my voice, the one I'd trained myself to soften and suppress in silence. I took back my time and gave it to people and places that valued it. I took back my story and refused to let him rewrite the ending. Most importantly, I took back the belief that I deserved more than crumbs, more than lies, more than being someone's safety net, while they lived their real life somewhere else. This wasn't a story about revenge, though some people saw it that way. It wasn't even about anger, though anger had been a useful fuel for a while. This was about reclamation, about taking back everything I'd given away piece by piece over 3 decades, about remembering that before I was his wife, I was me. And me was enough, had always been enough. I didn't lose 32 years. I invested them in learning exactly what I wouldn't accept ever again. And that knowledge, that was the gift his betrayal gave me. The freedom to start over, the courage to choose myself. The understanding that sometimes the person you need to confront isn't the one who betrayed you, is the one in the mirror who kept accepting less than she deserved. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and honoring your truth, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me where you're reading this from and what part of Janet's journey spoke to you most. Hit that like button if you believe dignity matters more than keeping up appearances. And subscribe, because I'll be sharing more stories of women who chose themselves, even when it cost them everything they thought they wanted. Your story matters, your voice matters, and you are enough, exactly as you are.